Forget Mount Everest. Nepal is going through the most tumultuous period in its history. Particularly in the last decade, the country was rocked by a Maoist insurgency, one of the most violent, exciting, and horrendous uprisings. Nearly 14,000 people were killed by King Gyanendra's army and the Maoists. Thousands were injured, maimed, hundreds of thousands were displaced, and the women and children have suffered the most. In the last 4 years, I've interviewed hundreds of Nepali, important politicians as well as forgotten victims, like children who were kidnapped by the Maoist cadre and later escaped.
They used to take us, and one time they take, I said I don't want to go, they beat and they take away so far place, and they did not give food, and they said you have to join with us, and they write name, and then in my home our father and mother don't know where I am going.
There's got to be a much broader acceptance of everybody is part of Nepali society. Inclusion of people of other castes, languages, religions, social status, occupations, whatever it is. But time is running out, and as Ian said, there's an awful lot of serious work to be done.
Okay. The king was ousted by a popular uprising in 2006. It's clear that the people want some form of democracy. But security has to be established before fair elections can be held. The Maoist and new insurgent groups are announcing parallel governments, especially in the south, where ethnic minorities are demanding autonomy from the ruling class in Kathmandu. Their endless strikes, bombings, and acts of intimidation have crippled the economy in the last year. They control the roadways that bring in all of Nepal's fuel supplies. They implement blockades along the southern routes to grind Nepalese business to a halt. Folks who ignore the strikes are dragged out onto the street and beaten, sometimes killed, their vehicles torched. I know. I've been through the roadblocks in the middle of the night in southern Nepal. I've interviewed the displaced people, huge tent villages of refugees in their own country, afraid to return to their own villages. Tourists from the west can still trek in the Himalaya. But in southern Nepal, it's the wild, wild west. And neither the Maoists nor the traditional political parties have control over it.
Well, all the disparities are important, of course, and it would be very hard to set one against another. And it does, at the end of the day, come back to Nepal being such a poor country. I think the disparities are thrown into such high relief because everybody is poor and everybody is struggling for a few more crumbs from a very small cake. And the way the political process is moving at the moment, the spotlight shines for a little while here, or it shines on the Dalits, the former untouchable groups, or on women's issues, and on and on and on, because all those groups feel that they have not actually had voice, they've not had a fair share, they've not had access to power.
So we still have one of the highest numbers of death among women in the whole world, caused by like pregnancy and childbirth. But also, I did a study on impact of conflict on women, and 80% of the women I talked to said they lived in constant fear that their daughters or their sisters or their daughter-in-laws would be raped, kidnapped, or taken away, and they lived in constant fear that the men in their lives would be killed. Most of the girls who are raped in Nepalese society don't have any options, so they end up killing themselves.
60% of the people in Nepal are under the age of 30. The youth movement in Nepal has been essential in paving the way for democracy. People like Govinda Rijal, who was beaten within an inch of his life during the mass demonstrations to oust the king.
I was putting my both hands like this so that I had an exam close by, so I wanted to protect my right hand. So I put my left hand up and right hand down, and it was broken. I realized that. Then I put my right hand up, and it was broken too. it was all bleeding so worstly, I don't even remember. Then I was partly unconscious. I was partially unconscious. They were all bleeding up. Then I heard a sound. One of them was saying that, okay, this person is dead now and we should not hang around him anymore. We could be in trouble. So they pulled me by hand and my leg and threw me in a small ditch on the side. And they went.
Since the beginning of 2008, there's been an eerie resurfacing of the king. According to a poll by the Asian Foundation, 49% of Nepalis think there should be a place for the monarchy in the future government. No doubt due in part because the interim government has fallen so short in taking control of all the various power struggles within the country. Your critics have suggested that you are helping to stall the proceedings on behalf of the king. How do you respond, and what do you think should happen to the monarchy?
Look, I'm all the time being blamed to be helping king. I am the worst victim of king's takeover. He put me into prison for 9.5 years, half months. People might look to the king. That is my worry. I am very much worried about this.
Presides over feudal economy, politics and culture has been ruling Nepal for last 250 years. This has been the biggest obstacle for Nepal moving into a modern age. So we want to abolish this feudal institution. In that sense, whosoever are in favor of abolishing this institution, we are ready to ally with them. But those who don't want to abolish monarchy or want to keep monarchy in one form or another, we distrust them.
Yeah, there definitely has been some. I mean, it's undeniable that a lot of the Maoist leaders from Nepal were in India for a good chunk of the past 10 years. There have been some Naxalites from India coming up here. There have been some killed up here. What we don't want is to see a Maoist regime inside Nepal exporting revolution into India, forcing the Indians to reevaluate how they view Nepal, and frankly, thereby probably forcing the Chinese to reevaluate how they view Nepal.
One way or another, the Maoists will not budge from their position that the monarchy must, once and for all, be eliminated. And to give the Maoists their due, it was they who in the 1990s really opened up the question of human rights and equality for all ethnic and societal groups. It was a can of worms. But it was a can of worms that had to be opened by someone, and certainly the autocracy set up by King Gyanendra was not going to address these issues apart from paying lip service. Many people that I've interviewed claim that the Maoists are still engaging in acts of violence and intimidation. How do you answer that accusation?
No, that's not true. So our violence was not an offensive violence, but it was a very defensive violence. It was just resistance violence. So given that historical record, I think it's not true if somebody alleges we are still indulging in violence or intimidation. That's not true.
But the same week I interviewed Dr. Bhattarai, I filmed victims in a local hospital, women with crushed uteruses beaten by the Maoists' Youth Communist League. The question remains, who will prevail?
बोलाए अनि धम्की दिए माओवादी भनेको के हो अब माओवादीको चरित्र अब तिमीले देख्छौ भनेर पुरा हामीलाई धम्की दिएको तिनीले हातमा समातेर यस्तै हानेको खुट्टामा त्यस्तो जोड्नु पुरै बुझे बुझे हामी हजुर हजुर